Got some folks on locals. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Livestream 108 for the last symptom. See if I can get some more light in here. Oh, it's a little better. How you all doing? Got some good topics for us to talk about today, but I want to find out how you all are doing first. As always, the first half is open to everybody on locals primarily, then YouTube and Rumble. And then the second half, we close her down and it becomes for supporters only on locals. That's when we talk about the really controversial stuff. So, if you'd like to join us on locals, we encourage you to do that. You can do that by going to thelastsymptom.locals.com in your web browser, or you can download the really spiffy, nifty locals.com app from the App Store, and then just search for The Last Symptom by Brian Barnett within. We'd love to have you. So, folks are coming in. Two topics I wanted to talk about today, in addition to whatever you folks would like to talk about, is feeling ashamed and embarrassed and the natural effects on us that has. Hoping to get some interaction with you on that discussion. The other topic I wanted to hopefully get into today is the folks that I see have the most success, who are having the most success. Ivan on YouTube says he just stopped by to say hi. Your Quora articles are a gold mine. Thank you for everything you do. Well, thank you, Ivan. There are a lot more articles and more refined articles on the Last Symptom website. So if you enjoy the little bit of writing I've done on Quora, I hope you'll run over to thelastsymptom.com and check out the article library there. I've been adding more things to it here lately, and so it's a nice place to have the library of stuff that I write. Well, hello, Laura. Nice to have you here today. It's evening for you, I know. I hope that you're doing well. How are you doing? How's everybody's summer going? Hi, Carrie. Nice to have you here. For me, I've been, you know how when summer hits, it's like people pulling you this way. And I've had a lot of obligations that I've been trying to get through. I hate having things hanging out over my head. I don't know if that's true for you folks too, where you've got like some obligation hanging out over your head, and it kind of like it disrupts your life. Because no matter what you're doing, you know, I've got this thing I got to do. And so I've just come out of a period of time like that where I think I've gotten all these obligations, these summer obligations out of my way, you know, graduation parties and other events. And so I'm so happy that for the next couple months, I think I won't have to, I'm not obligated to give up my weekends for anybody else. And that makes me happy. Carrie, hot? Yeah, it's been hot here too. Julie, hi, glad to hear from you. Yeah, today is probably the nicest day of the year so far. The humidity has broke. It's like mid 70s, gorgeous weather. And last night I got to see Kathy Mattea in concert. It was in an outdoor amphitheater, and I thought, look, because it's been almost 100 degrees every day. And I thought, boy, I hope I'm not sitting out there just like roasting in my own sweat. But it started at 7 p.m. And so by the time the concert started, the humidity had broke, the temperatures had come down. It was the perfect night for just watching Kathy Mattea perform on stage. A really nice little kind of small, intimate environment. She growed up right around here, so it's kind of like her coming home for her. She's in Nashville now. Kathy Mattea is famous for the song "Where You Been." Where you been? It's about this woman always worrying about her man, and then in the end, she's got Alzheimer's, and she doesn't recognize anybody. And they wheel her husband in to her hospital room, and she recognizes him. Where you been? And it's really touching and everything. She told a hilarious story last night. If you've not heard that song, I know if you get folks aren't here in the United States, particularly, if you don't share my background, maybe it's not a song you've heard. But where where have you been by Kathy Mattea? Look that up after today's show. So she tells this story, and she says that she wrote the song based on a true experience that her husband had with his grandmother. And he had wheeled his grandpa in to see his grandmother, and something similar had happened. And so she wrote this beautiful romantic song based on that experience of her husband. And she said that they had been married for like 30 years, and they're driving down the road in her car, and her song comes on. And after 30 years, her husband said, you know, that's not exactly how it happened. This is brand news. This is news to her. After she's written this song, it's become a #1 hit. It's turned her into a superstar. After 30 years, she says, that's not exactly how it happened. He says, the way it really happened is that when we wheeled him in, Grandma looked at him, and she didn't say it all sweetly like, hey, where you been? Oh, I've needed you. She instead said it like in an accusatory way. Where you been? Oh, she had the crowd rolling with that story. All right, let me catch up here. Carrie, you just come back from Hawaii? You dirty dog. Why didn't you take the rest of us? Boy, that must have been nice. A lot of roosters were there? A lot of roosters and chickens walking about? Laura's in the rainy season. Does that mean, Laura, does that mean that it's humid as well? Laura's in Africa. And because Africa is so vast, I never know what to imagine. Like what type of environment to exactly imagine. Very humid. Oh, it's that humidity that kills me. Hey, Julie. Good to see you. See ya. Penny says it's 66 degrees where she's at. She's down in the south. Or, I think. Down in like Alabama, Louisiana, those areas, Florida sometimes. Yeah, it's a beautiful day here today. All right, let's get into today's topics. What's on your minds, folks? You got something that's been on your mind that you'd like to talk about? Any questions that have been? Oh, Penny's in Germany. Okay, 66 degrees in Germany. Yeah, yeah. Laura says that seasons are different in Africa depending on where you're at. It is a vast area. I look at the globe and I compare like the United States to Africa. It just dwarfs the United States. And, the United States is not a small place. Julie, I'd like to talk about good friends who don't respect boundaries. Good, good topic, Julie. You want to give me, well, I'll tell you, maybe we can resolve this real easy. That's what consequences are for. It's what conditions and consequences are for. So, a question where you're saying, what about good friends? They're not respecting boundaries. It's almost like you're insinuating that you're helpless. But one thing, and I see Laura popped a question up. I'll get to Laura here in a second. Let me finish my thought here with Julie. In all of the profession, everybody talking about these sorts of things. Professional therapists, psychologists, you get on the internet and you've got all these, what do they call them, health coaches and stuff like this. They all put emphasis on the wrong thing when talking about boundaries. Boundaries is the least important thing of the whole formula, because a boundary is just a line in the sand. It's like, this is what I accept, everything on this side of the line, and everything on that side of the line is what I don't accept. That I don't accept that into my life. Okay, so that's the easiest thing. The easiest thing is choosing what you are okay with and what you're not okay with. That's the easiest, least relevant part of the formula. So instead of talking about boundaries, I like to talk about the BCCCs of emotional health. That is boundaries, communication, consequences, and conditions. And you can reverse those. It can be conditions and consequences. It just depends on the situation. But of the four in that formula, do you know what the least important one is? The boundaries. The boundaries. Why do I say it's the least important? Because without the other three, it's nothing. There is no boundary. So let me illustrate it for you. I say, you know what? I don't want you calling me that name. If I don't have conditions and consequences that I'm going to enact if you do call me that name, was there ever a boundary? No, there was never a boundary, because if I don't enact a condition or a consequence, then basically, no matter how much I yap about it, the reality is I am okay with that. Does that make sense? So I say I'm not okay with it, but I'm not doing anything about it when you do it. So I am okay with it. The most important part of boundaries is not boundaries. It's consequences and conditions. What are conditions? Conditions serves a two-pronged purpose. For one, conditions let you determine what people must meet in order to be allowed in. The other purpose that they serve is that when somebody has violated boundaries and they've been kicked out, they're not part of your life anymore because they don't qualify. When that has happened, conditions allows you to gives them something that they can meet in order to requalify to be allowed back in. So the question was about good friends who don't respect boundaries. That is not a helpless situation, and it's not a situation where you're at the mercy of the friend. Instead, it's a situation of a person who does not understand that without consequences and conditions, there is no such thing as a boundary. It's just blah, blah, blah. That's all a boundary is. It without consequences and conditions. Am I making sense? So a boundary only exists. It only exists at all if there is a concrete consequence for ignoring it, or conditions that must be met in order for it to be okay. So I'll give you an example of a condition where it would make a boundary, the violation of a boundary, okay. Let's say that I say I will not be called a certain name, and my good friend calls me that name anyway. What are some situations where I might be healthily able to overlook that? He's drunk. He's insane. He's 80 years old and he's suffering from Alzheimer's. See, this is where the conditions determine that the violation of the boundary is not a big deal because the person is not in his or her right mind. So there's a situation where conditions again determine whether or not I can overlook that or I can't overlook that, even after I've set the boundary. So Julie, does that answer the question? I understand that the person's a good friend. Maybe the feeling that a lot of people have is that I don't want to hurt this person's feelings by holding them to a consequence. Well, that's an option that you have. But in that case, there's no boundary. Because instead of holding the person to a consequence, what's more important for you is not to hurt their feelings. See, the great thing about the BCCCs of emotional health is that they allow us to create exactly the life we want. Well, as close to what we want as possible, as far as what we're affected by and influenced by and what we're exposed to. So they're really effective that way only, though, if we're willing to follow through with consequences. And the consequences are not like I'm going to punch you in the nose. A consequence can't be anything that involves a force upon the other person. So in other words, the consequence can only involve a force upon our own selves, a force we enact upon our own selves. What does that mean? It means maybe blocking them from our phone, or not going over to their house as often, or looking for a replacement friend. These are things. Julie says that she values her friendship, but Julie has changed. And she's not the follower she was. So the friend is having a bit of a problem with this. Well, keep in mind that when I'm talking about consequences can be very small and relatively small and relatively small. Let's just say that. And they can also be very big. So with my friends, because they're my friends, and I have a lot of unhealthy friends, Julie. And I value their friendship, even though they're unhealthy and everything. But a consequence that I might enact for a friend who I understand is unhealthy and doesn't understand these things, is not working on himself or herself in this way, those consequences would be small consequences. So I'm not talking about like, oh, we can't be friends anymore. Consequence, for example, of bringing up a topic that I don't believe that my friend, for example, is not being emotionally honest or intellectually honest about, is that I'm not going to have that conversation with him. That's a consequence. So he starts having that conversation, and I either change the subject or I don't get into it. So he's having the conversation with himself, and I'm just listening. That's a consequence. So you see, it's not a very forceful or offensive consequence, is it? But it's still a consequence. So think in those terms. Am I enacting a consequence? So I, I wonder if maybe you could give us a specific idea of how she has violated a boundary of yours. If you can give us a specific detail, maybe I can brainstorm with you about how I might handle that. Let me catch up to some of these other comments here, and I appreciate you folks being patient with me. I see the comments while I'm talking, but I don't want to lose my thought. All right. Laura asks about stalling in the recovery process. That's interesting because that goes hand in hand with some of these topics I want to discuss here in a bit. Julie says, any ideas on continuing to do voluntary work when there are quite a few clashes of egos and arguments? Yeah, Julie, there's this expression that I've used a lot lately and that people have found value in. It's observe, not participate. So practice becoming an observer rather than a participant. You can be right in the middle of an argument as an observer and just not participate in the argument. So there might be arguing going on between various parties. It doesn't affect you if you maintain your status as simply a non-judgmental observer. How do you become a participant? You begin sharing in the emotional unhealthy ways of interacting. So as long as you don't do that, and it requires not taking things personal, you can become an observer, not a participant. Now, I was talking to one of our members, and she says, I like that. I've tweaked it a little bit for myself. I said, yeah, really? What did you tweak it to? She says, I like to say observe, not absorb. That's pretty good. That's pretty good. It's the same thing. I think her wording is actually a little superior to mine. It's when you can observe people being unhealthy and belligerent, or what did you say, egos and arguments. You can observe this. You just don't absorb it. When you don't absorb it, you don't participate in it, because participation usually involves our feelings getting invested in it, and that prompting us to then speak up or step in and those sorts of things. So as long as you don't absorb that energy, then you can remain a neutral, non-judgmental observer. Be right there in the situation without being a participant in it. Penny says, I worked in a leadership role on a volunteer board. There were lots of personalities. All were passionate for the cause. It takes leadership who's willing to listen to all sides and able to steer the conversation in a manner that is respectful to all. Cooling off periods work as well. It's very insightful. Okay, Julie gave us a specific example. Her example is that she invited the friend to do something, and Julie had set a time, and when the time came, the friend did not show up at the right time. You remember, Julie, the expression that another expression that I use, people are the weather. People are the weather. As long as you can keep that in mind, you can remain very powerful and have plenty of options. So I may have plans to go to a baseball game. I don't, but let's say that I have plans to go to a baseball game tomorrow at 7 o'clock. I've made my plans, but I get to the ballpark and a thunderstorm rolls in. and the game is canceled. That's a pretty good analogy of your friend. If we are keeping in mind that the nature of weather is the same as your relationship with your friend. In other words, your friend is going to do what your friend does. So when I go to the ballpark and the thunderstorm rolls in, what are my options? Are one of my options to make the weather stop storming? Like just make the storm go away? That's not one of my options. What happens when your friend doesn't show up at the time that you said that you wanted to do the thing? Well, one of your options is not to reverse time and make her show up at the appropriate time. Julie says it happens repeatedly with her. Stick with me here. So what are your options with the thunderstorm? I can choose to get a raincoat. I can choose to go to the store. I can choose to go to a restaurant instead. I can choose to watch a baseball game on my phone. I have lots of options, and not one of those options involves me controlling the weather. So, Julie, with your friend, you have lots of options. Not a single one of your options involves controlling your friend. Well, what does that mean? It means if you don't like being stood up consistently, repeatedly, as you've said, if you don't like that, you need to make some decisions for yourself. Such as, who is the person inviting her to do these things repeatedly? Who's choosing to do that? It's you. So why don't you stop doing that? Because you're, how do I say this? I don't want to, I don't want you to feel like I'm berating you. I'm not trying to berate you, but I'm trying to help you see this thing. Just see the obvious answer right in front of you. How many times do you think it would take for you to stick your finger in an electrical outlet before you'd figure out not to do that anymore? For some reason, when we're unhealthy, our default thinking is always control over the other person, get them to change, get them to do things differently, rather than viewing the thing in its the true nature of it as, well, I don't have any control over her, but I don't like getting stood up every time that I invite this person to do something. The obvious answer, which is right before you, is to find somebody else to invite to things. Or to invite this friend a lot less. Or to invite her to things where the time is not really that important, like the time that she shows up. I have a friend like this, by the way. I have a good friend, and I've talked about him in the past. He has difficulties going on at home that make it very difficult for him to 100% be able to commit to a thing with me. Well, but he's my friend. And my friendship with him, and I understand his situation is very difficult with his wife. She's very controlling and jealous and things like this. But it's good for him to come over and spend time with me and get that socialization, be able to express himself, have a friend to confide in, and those sorts of things. So I'll say, buddy, I want you to come over on Friday night at 7 o'clock. We'll have a couple drinks and talk. He'll say, well, okay, I'm going to do my best to do that. It's about 50-50. Now, think about the sacrifice I have to make in order to make those plans with him. Knowing that the surety of him actually showing up at 8 o'clock on Friday night is about 50-50. Think about the sacrifice I have to make there. It means that it whatever else comes up that I might get invited to, that I might want to do, I have to I have to push it aside. I have to sacrifice that and say, I'm not going to do that. Instead, I'm going to roll the dice for this 50-50 chance to get to spend time with my friend. I don't want to say his name because I have said his name in the past, but I don't know that he might not ever become a member of the Last Symptom, so I don't want to embarrass him. So it is a sacrifice. Why am I willing to make the sacrifice? Because he's my friend. And if I can be helpful to him in his situation, I am willing to give up an evening for a 50-50 possibility that he might get to come over here, get some socialization in, get to spend time with me, his friend, and go home feeling a little bit better. I'm willing to do that. Am I willing to do that for everybody in all circumstances with all of my friends? Like that, I make plans with them and they don't even show up. No, I'm not willing to do that with everybody. These are specifically for his circumstances. But I do have other friends that if they don't show up consistently 2 or 3 times, it's even goes beyond that. I have friends that if I invite them, there's several people that I've been wanting to get to know in this area that I'm friendly with. I invited them over on 3 separate occasions, and each time they oh, I can't do it. Oh, I'd love to, but I can't. You remember another saying that I will often say? People do what they want to do. And if you don't dig into that, it seems silly and elementary, but it's profound, because it means that if a person isn't doing something, they don't want to do it. This is within the realm of our capabilities as people, by the way. I'm not saying like if a person really wants to fly like Superman, they can. But because that's outside the realm of a person's capabilities. But everything within a person's capabilities, if they're not doing it, they don't want to do it. So I invite a person over to my house. Oh boy, I'd love to, but I've got to, I've been putting off raking these leaves for weeks. I got to rake these leaves. Okay. I can understand you don't really want to go out. You got raking leaves is more important to you. Fine. Next month. Hey, come on over. We'll have drinks and we'll grill some meat out on the thing. Oh, and then there's something else. I gotta go mow grass. You see these reasons for why I can't are it's like raking the leaves is like, that's so important you can't even put it off for a day. Like you can't come over and then just rake the leaves tomorrow or some other day this week. And when all of the explanations for why I can't or for why they can't are on that level, after about the 3rd invitation, you know what I say to myself? I need to make a decision for myself, because for me to invite you over for a cookout is not a small thing. I have to look at my calendar, find a time that's good, completely wipe that day free of any other things that I might like to do, and then offer the invitation. Commit to that day and then offer the invitation. When a person doesn't appreciate the effort that I've put into just simply choosing that day, let alone, and forget about actually putting in the work to grilling the food, buying the food, the drinks, things like this, all because I'm interested in getting to know you. And raking leaves is more important. I understand that. I have those days too where I'm like, it's kind of appealing, but I would rather just stay home. After about 3 strikes, using the baseball analogy, after about 3 strikes, I say to myself, I need to do something for myself here. And what I'm going to do is I'm not going to extend any more invitations to that person, because they don't want it might be an appealing idea to them, but it's not appealing enough that it's something that they actually want to do. Because if they wanted to spend an afternoon with me eating grilled food and having drinks, they would do it, especially after 3 invitations. So I got a little winded there, but I'm happy to share that thinking of mine. I'm always thinking about, what can I do? What do I need? What do I need? I would like to get to know them, but I can't control them. I give them a few opportunities. They don't take the opportunity. Okay, now what do I need? Well, what I need is to stop wasting my time with this person who obviously doesn't value the invitation I'm extending. So what else can I do for myself? I can find somebody else that I'm just as eager to get to know, and begin extending the invitations to them. All right, folks, we're going to go to supporters only on locals. So if you're watching on YouTube or Rumble, join us over there on locals. Links are at thelastsymptom.com. So in about 10 seconds, we're going to count down here. It's going to go to local supporters only, and we're going to get into our more personal discussions.